2025 in the UFC is going to be absolutely crazy. We're going to get some big fights, hopefully Jones versus Aspinall, hopefully McGregor's return. But in this video today, we are going to be predicting each and every one of the 14 UFC pay-per-views for 2025. I'm going to give you the month, the number of the card, and potentially the location, and I'm going to tell you the title fights that I think are going to be on the card. So stick around to hear what I think UFC's 2025 pay-per-views are going to be. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. Before we get into the video, guys, please make sure to like, subscribe, drop a comment down below, all that good YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. If you want access to bonus content and you want to support the channel even further, become a channel member via the link in the description of this video or the join button on our channel homepage. Thank you very much. Back to the video. The UFC is getting off to a crazy start with the first two pay-per-views of 2025 already announced. UFC 311 right here. This is in Los Angeles. It's at the Intuit Dome in Inglewood, California. UFC 311. You have Arman Tsarukyan challenging Islam Makhachev in a rematch for his lightweight title. We also have Merab Dvalishvili defending his title against Umar Nurmagomedov, Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano, Yuri Prohaska versus Jamal Hill, Kevin Holland, Renner de Ritter, Johnny Walker, Bogdan Guskov, Peyton Talbot's on the card, Jailton Almeida, Sergey Spivak, Cedricus Dumas, Zach Reese, Grant Dawson, CDF. Honestly, great card. Fantastic pay-per-view to open up 2025. I'm hoping to be able to go to the card as well. We'll see. That's UFC 311 in January. And then UFC 312 in February in Sydney, Australia is Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland rematching for the middleweight title with a Zhang Weili, Tatiana Suarez co-main event, and then some other fights. But there's more to be announced. We don't know what the full main card is, but those are going to be the top two fights right there for sure. The two title fights on the card. That's UFC 311. That's UFC 312. Let's predict the rest of the UFC 2025 pay-per-views. So we're going to start off. That's going to be UFC 313. I think that's going to be in Las Vegas. I was laying out the entire year of pay-per-views and like when I think certain fights are going to be and when that means that the winner of that fight would make a title defense next and all of that. So here's what I have. March UFC 313, I think it's going to be in Las Vegas. I think there's going to be no title fights. I actually think it's going to be Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier trilogy. They both retire after the fight. No title fight in Vegas, something like that. That's what I think. Gaethje, Poirier 3 non-title fight, and then you get like a really big co-main, and it's not like the greatest card, but we're getting a lot of great cards in 2025. So I think that's an acceptable pay-per-view, especially after 311 and 312. And it'll be even more acceptable when I tell you UFC 314, which is the next one I think is going to happen. That is going to be in Miami. They're saying April, Miami, UFC 314. I think that's going to be Ilia Topuria versus Alex Volkanovski rematch. I think you're probably going to see Jorge Masvidal return on that card against like a Vicente Luque or a Colby Covington rematch, something like that. And then I think you're also going to see Diego Lopez versus Movsar Evloev on that card. That sounds really fun. Or when you put the Lopes-Movsar fight on the same card as Topuria Volk, that puts them on the same timetable for the winner of Volk and Topuria to fight the winner of Diego Lopez and Movsar. Down from there, I actually have a little bit of an interesting one there. UFC 315 in May. I think it's going to be in Chicago. I have a feeling about this because Bilal champion fighting out of the Chicago area, relative area. Juliana Pena, same thing, champion. I think you do UFC 315 in Chicago, Bilal versus Shavkat, Juliana Pena defending against Kayla Harrison, co-main event. Sounds good to me. Not the craziest pay-per-view, but that's two good fights. Harrison will smoke Pena, Shavkat will smoke Bilal, in my opinion, and that sets up a very interesting fight for Shavkat later in the year, which I'll get to. Moving on from there, I think May is actually going to have two pay-per-views. There's talk of May being in Brazil. So UFC 316, Brazil, I say Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev main event, and then you do a Pantoja versus Manel Kape co-main event. You have two Brazilian champions right now. You have to put them on the card, and you maybe even put like an Oliveira on that card as a. I'm just saying it's possible. It's possible, but Oliveira they bring to the U.S. a lot because he's such a big star. But Brazil, I think you have to at least put the two Brazilian champs on it. You have to do Pereira, Ankalaev, Pantoja, title defense, probably Manel Kopp, especially after his performance this past weekend in Tampa. Moving on from there, I think UFC 317, that's the end of June, they're saying. That's supposedly going to be International Fight Week. I think that's where Jones versus Aspinall happens. This very week, like yesterday or the day before, we heard Dana White say that Jones versus Aspinall is 100% going to happen. International Fight Week, Las Vegas. Make it happen. 6 months from now, perfect. 7 months from now, perfect. Jones doesn't like being active, so you can have him do that, take some time off. Aspinall is going to be ready to fight whenever. And I think they're finally going to cut that giant like $30-40 million check to Jon Jones. And then moving on from there, UFC 318, July. There's going to be 2 pay-per-views in July, I believe. UFC 318. I think that's far enough away to maybe assume that if he's going to come back, that UFC 318 or 19 in July is going to be Conor McGregor's return. I think it's going to be against Michael Chandler, maybe Nate Diaz. But I think UFC 318 in July is when we finally see Conor McGregor fight again, if ever. And if he doesn't fight by like June, July, or we at least don't have rumors of a fight, Conor's done. I'm relatively convinced he's not going to fight again. But if he's going to return, I think it's going to be like midsummer. After that, I have an interesting one because the rest of the year, I have different fights booked the way that I put together this year. I think UFC 319, late July. This is one of those cards that they do in like a random city that's like a Salt Lake City or a Jacksonville or something like that, because they have a routine. Like the last few years, they've done February and August-ish in Australia, and they've done like March, July, December in Vegas. October is always Abu Dhabi. November is always Madison Square Garden. So that really only leaves like August, July, May, and April and January as like ones to switch up with. And that's why we're getting Los Angeles in January. And I think we could get like a Chicago in May. But UFC 319, I have no idea where this would be. I think that Islam Makhachev is going to beat Arman Tsarukyan. I think Shavkat is going to beat Bilal. I think they're going to fight in a double champ type of fight at 170, leaving an interim champ opportunity open at 155. I think they do, in my opinion, the biggest possible fight at 155 pounds that's not for a title. Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, either BMF belt or interim 155 belt. One of the two, like something to determine the next lightweight contender. Because if you think about it, Oliveira coming off of a win because he just beat Michael Chandler and people want him to fight for the belt and he's a big star. Max Holloway, if you think about just 155 pounds, he's coming off of a knockout over Justin Gaethje. It makes a level of sense. Maybe they don't want to make it an interim fight and they do it for the BMF and then the winner gets to fight Islam, something like that. And then I think you could even do like a Valentina Shevchenko versus Manon Fiorot co-main, something like that. Moving on from there, August, they're saying that they're going to go back to Australia again. So I think UFC 320 in August, Perth, Australia. I think you're going to get DDP coming off of a win over Strickland. I think DDP beats Strickland. I think Australia is where you do DDP versus Khamzat. One of my most wanted fights that's not taking place yet. DDP versus Khamzat, main event, Australia. It's not in the US. I assume Khamzat could fight there. And then I think Wei Li's going to beat Tatiana Suarez. Australia and China are in the same time zone. That makes a level of sense, or some parts of China. And I think you do Wei Li title defense as a co-main to DDP and Khamzat. Fire card. And then September, UFC 321, Topuria coming off of a win over Volk. I think he's going to beat Volk again. I think he fights the winner of Movsar and Diego Lopez in Spain. I think September is far enough out for them to maybe figure out the arena situation in Spain. And so that makes that, I think that's what they do. I think they do the Spain card. Ilia Topuria's younger brother has also said he's going to be fighting sometime around summer. I believe he said. I think that's going to be in Spain, because they have enough Spanish guys that are semi-successful on the roster to put together a card in Spain with Topuria versus either Movsar or Diego Lopez as the main event. And then moving on from there, the October pay-per-view, always Abu Dhabi, UFC 322. That is where I think you do Islam Makhachev after beating Arman Tsarukyan in January. moving up to fight Shavkat, coming off of a win over Bilal. Both people from that part of the world that Abu Dhabi's very fond of. Co-main event, you do Umar against the winner of Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley. So main event, Islam Makhachev moving up to welterweight to challenge for the 170 belt against Shavkat. And then Umar defending his belt. I personally think he's going to beat Merab in January. Umar versus Peter Yan, or I'm sorry, the winner of Peter Yan and Sean O'Malley. Moving on from there, November, UFC 223, Madison Square Garden, New York. I personally think Alex Pereira is going to beat Magomed Ankalaev. I think the Madison Square Garden, November, UFC 323 is going to be Alex Pereira challenging for the heavyweight belt against the winner of Jones and Aspinall. That's what I think is going to happen. One of the biggest fights in UFC history. Not much else to say there. Then moving on from there, December of 2025, UFC 324. December is always in Las Vegas. This is kind of one of those ones where they always put together an iffy main event. I think it's something like Pantoja title defense and like a Kayla Harrison title defense after beating Juliana Pena. I think that makes sense. Like maybe by then Muhammad Makhachev is back in the UFC and you have like a Kayla Harrison fighting Amanda Nunes coming out of retirement in the main event, and then like Pantoja, Muhammad Makhachev in the co-main. I think that makes a level of sense. Just another thought that I had, the Conor card, middle of summer, I say that ends up actually being in Saudi Arabia. I think Saudi Arabia throws a bag at the UFC to book Conor like mid-year in Saudi Arabia, maybe Chandler, maybe Holloway, something like that. I'll share my little list right here, but what I have, we have UFC 311, Los Angeles, Makhachev versus Sarukian, Umar versus Merab. And then we have February in Sydney, UFC 312, DDP Strickland, Weili versus Tatiana Suarez. Those are already booked and announced. Promos already started. March, I think that's going to be in Vegas. UFC 313, Gaethje versus Poirier 3, pay-per-view with no title on the line. April, UFC 314 in Miami, Topuria Volkanovski rematch, Masvidal return, Diego Lopez versus Movsar. And then I think May, you do it in like Chicago or something because you have two Chicago area champs. UFC 315, Bilal versus Shavkat, and Juliana Pena versus Kayla Harrison. May, UFC 316 Brazil, I say Pereira Ankalaev and Pantoja versus Manel Kape. UFC 317 International Fight Week in Las Vegas in June, I say that's Jones versus Aspinall. Sounds like a good timetable. July, UFC 318 Saudi Arabia, McGregor versus Chandler. July, UFC 319 Oliveira Holloway BMF or interim lightweight title fight and Shevchenko versus Manon Fiorot. August, UFC 320 in Perth, Australia. I say DDP Khamzat and Weili title defense. And then September, UFC 321. I say Topuria against the winner of Movsar and Diego Lopez in Spain. And then October, UFC 322 Abu Dhabi. I say Makhachev versus Shavkat for the 170-pound belt. Umar against the winner of Peter Yan and O'Malley rematching at some point this year. November, UFC 223 at Madison Square Garden in New York. I say Pereira coming off of a win over Magomed Ankalaev, moving up to challenge for the heavyweight belt against the winner of Jones and Aspinall. And then December, Las Vegas. I think randomly enough, I think this is going to be Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes main event. And like a Pantoja title defense co-main event, maybe like maybe Muhammad Makhachev comes back, something like that. Maybe a Joshua Van moves up the rankings this year. Maybe an Urseg gets a rematch or Brandon Moreno works his way in there. And if they don't do a Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes fight, maybe you have like a Pantoja Moreno fight again as the December pay-per-view main event. That's my thoughts for the UFC pay-per-views for 2025. Let me know your thoughts down below. UFC's done for a month. We're getting a little creative with the content. Let me know what you guys think down below. Thanks. Thanks for watching this video. Please make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. If you want access to bonus content, become a channel member today by clicking the join button on our channel homepage or the link down below this video. If you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, go check out my podcast, What's Up Bro, with Wyatt and Bo in the link down below. Go watch this suggested video, and I'll see you next time.